All right, so Chris Cuomo did a segment on his show on CNN yesterday where he got into the rising crime rates around the United States. And listen, I know we talk a lot about how corporate media outlets are almost indistinguishable in a lot of the ways that they discuss economic issues and militarism, etc. But this rant about policing and the crime rates in the United States is literally indistinguishable from something you could hear from any of the Fox hosts over on that network. So let's go ahead and listen to just the beginning intro of this entire segment. And I got a couple different things that I want to point to, and we'll discuss how ridiculous this is, but really just feeding into the right-wing narratives they've been talking about with this latest spike in crime.
Now, the question people are saying to you is, why are crime rates spiking? We know why crime rates are spiking, and it's not as simple as being 1, 2, or 3 gun laws away. You got to put people in jail when they break the law, and laws have changed to keep that from happening. We know why this is happening. The question is, do we have the courage to face it and do something about it in a woke society? The Wizard of Oz breaks down the numbers. Next.
Okay, so what the fuck was that? What the fuck was that? In a woke society? Do we have the courage to start mass arresting people in a woke society? And what is he even referring to on the policies? What are you talking about? What, the laws changed in all of these cities around the country that suddenly crimes are now legal? What? I don't even know what the fuck he's referring to in this clip, but feeding into these same exact talking points that Republicans use all the time on networks like Fox News of, because of the Black Lives Matter movement, all of these laws, they're just legalizing criminal behavior and they're letting everybody out of jails. This is not happening, okay? This is not happening. None of these major cities defunded their police. None of these major cities are releasing any non-violent drug offenders, for example. None of this is happening, and he doesn't even make it clear what he's even referring to. And just to give you a perspective on crime overall, okay, U.S. violent and property crime rates have plunged since the 1990s, regardless of data source. So, listen, crime rates have been going successively down over the last 2 decades. This is a trend that has been very consistent. Now, when you analyze why crime rates have slightly spiked up in the last year, he doesn't even talk about the fact that we're still going through and have gone through an ongoing pandemic where there has been massive economic devastation in some of the poorest and most vulnerable communities in the country. He doesn't even talk about that, as if there's no connection between economic situations and material conditions and crime. He doesn't even talk about that. He phrases this as, we need to lock up more people. And this is how ridiculous this is. I mean, in the United States already, we have 5% of the world's total population and roughly 25% of the world's prison population. So we are literally already arresting and imprisoning more people than any other country on earth, and really more than any other country throughout history. So how could you possibly believe that the answer is that we're not locking up enough people? Regardless of what you think the multivariable and factored causes are for an increase in crime, the solution is not locking up more people. Just look at the data. It's completely ridiculous. So let me jump ahead here to the next clip where this guy apparently breaks down the complex data that's behind this. And this is where it gets even more ridiculous, because the graph that he uses in this is a complete joke, and it's really just straight up Copaganda. So 1946, there we go.
Odds, and begin at the beginning with Harry Enton laying out the numbers. Let's take the 3 big cities. Murder rates are all still going up. So what do you see in that kind of baseline set of numbers?
Yeah, I think it's important not just to compare to 2020, right? It's important to compare to 2019 and look at the homicide rate. It's up 53% in New York. It's up 29% in Los Angeles compared to 2 years ago. It's up 21% compared to Chicago 2 years ago. And in New York, you're already seeing the political ramifications tonight in the early returns with Eric Adams, who ran as the tough on crime candidate in the New York City Democratic primary, is right now ahead. So it's very clear to me that these homicide rates being up are definitely having some impact, at least at the ballot box.
Okay, so first of all, just the first part of those statistics that they're showing, it doesn't make sense to show a year-by-year increase in crime rates. Again, especially if you're not talking about the fact that we just went through a fucking pandemic. But regardless, putting the year-over-year, when, as I just showed you, over the last couple of decades, crime has been successively going down. Sometimes there are spikes, sometimes there are dips, but overall, the trend has been going down. But they just showed the 2019 to 2020 comparison, and again, they're not even talking about the fact that COVID-19 is even a thing that existed. And then this guy jumps in and continues on with his analysis here.
Everybody says, let's rethink it. New York's had these big bail reform laws and figuring out how to do fair policing. Now you do have to ask whether or not they are bearing the fruit of those measures. And
he just said that putting in place laws that are enforcing fair policing is what's leading to an increase in crime. fair policing is going to lead to an increase in crime, even as just a standalone statement that makes absolutely no fucking sense. But in addition to that, again, I don't know what he's even talking about here. What laws is he specifically talking about here that he thinks led to a correlation in an increase in crime? He has no actual data to back up what he's saying. He's just pulling this out of his ass and relying on the fact that his audience might intuitively believe, oh yeah, because of the Black Lives Matter movement, oh, I guess they're being weak on crime now. This is just completely fucking made up. And on top of that, how ridiculous is it that the media continuously talks about these issues as if they are completely detached from public opinion? They'll bring up like public opinion polls or the fact that Eric Adams did well in the New York mayoral race and he's the tough on crime candidate, and they don't talk about the fact that you're every night and alongside your colleagues doing propaganda like this to influence public opinion, and then they just turn around and say, oh, well, clearly people are really concerned about crime. Well, maybe it's because you're doing shit like this. I mean, they act as if they have no influence on public opinion, but they continue on here.
We will look into this more. So let's look at violent crime, because now you get a pushback to the premise, which is everything's worse.
Yeah, this is really interesting to me. And what we see here, look at the violent crime rate. So this is homicides plus rape plus robbery plus aggravated battery. And what we see here is that, in fact, there's very little change compared to a year ago. And in fact, compared to 2019, in New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago, the rates are all actually down. So whatever is going on in these cities right now is something that is causing the murder rate to spike, but the other violent crimes actually mostly to fall.
Okay, so in other words, they're cherry-picking data points here in order to form the narrative that they are trying to form. Okay, that's what they're doing here. They're literally admitting that the premise of their argument is false with data like this.
This is one of these puzzles, and crime is often these types of puzzles, right? If we knew how to necessarily bring down the violent crime rate, then, we'd have low crime everywhere. But we don't know exactly what works, and this is a particularly odd puzzle, especially coming out of the coronavirus pandemic.
Well, look, I mean, you and I are New Yorkers. We know what worked here. We know that Bratton coming in during the Giuliani administration and doing the broken windows campaign of catching people doing small level crimes, putting them in jail, it wound up cutting, in addition with a lot of other economic opportunity and educational measures, it wound up taking New York City to a much better place. Now,
okay, so he even just touched, the co-host here, the guest that he has on, just touched on the fact that we just went through a pandemic, and immediately Chris Cuomo's response to that is not to analyze the material conditions of people or the economic circumstances, but he immediately jumps to saying we need to bring back broken windows policing. All right, let me just read to you a little bit of an excerpt here from about broken windows policing. So, in cities where broken windows has taken root, there is little evidence that it has worked as intended. The theory has instead resulted in what critics say is aggressive over-policing in minority communities, which often creates more problems than it solves. Such practices can strain criminal justice systems, burden impoverished people with fines for minor offenses, and fracture the relationship between police and minorities. It can also lead to tragedy, and they give an example here. In New York in 2014, Eric Garner died from a police chokehold after police approached him for selling loose cigarettes on a street corner. Police should not be policing this shit, Chris Cuomo, you goddamn idiot. This is absolutely ridiculous. He's literally going back to the 90s tough on crime policing as if that worked, as if that didn't lead to the problem of mass incarceration that we have today. He's just completely ignoring the material conditions of people who are living in these cities and what happened over the last and what happened specifically over the last year with the pandemic, and just jumping to the same broken ideas that haven't worked in the past. So it just completely ridiculous analysis here. Again, indistinguishable from what you would actually find on something like Fox News. So now I'm going to jump ahead 23 here and show you the graph that they used in order to justify their fear-mongering about a rise in crime rates.
48%, June 41, March 29.
Okay, this is the graph that they put up. Now, take a close look at this, all right? I'm going to move myself out of the way here a little bit. And, okay, so August 2018, you see right there, right? August 2018. Then it jumps to March of 2019, then it jumps to June of 2020, then it jumps to April of 2021. So jumping all around with weird margins between these two things. Then, in addition to that, the graph is fucking backwards on its x-axis, okay? The years, when you read a normal graph, at least in the United States, we read left to right. This graph is going right to left in order to give the impression that it went from 48 down to 41, and whoa, look at this big spike over here, when in reality, it went from 52 to 49, down to 41, and then now it's back up to 48, which is still lower than these two ones. So they literally reversed the graph in order to give the impression to the viewers that there was a significantly more, a higher increase than there actually was. So they are literally manipulating the graphs here and doing propaganda in order to justify their narrative. So this is absolutely ridiculous. This is one of the most deranged segments I've even seen on CNN, which is saying a lot because they have a lot of deranged segments, but this is just complete propaganda. There's nothing else to say about this. This is propaganda on behalf of the narrative that what we need is more mass incarceration, more policing, and these are the same solutions that have never worked. They've never worked throughout history. Again, 5% of the world's population, 25% of the world's prison population. The problem is not under policing. The problem is not under incarceration. It's insane that this is the type of shit that is being aired on the supposed left-wing half of our corporate networks that we have talking about these issues. So completely ridiculous, embarrassing segment for Chris Cuomo.